What if I told you that the fire you've been searching for, the drive to push harder, to rise earlier, to keep going when everything tells you to quit, is already inside of you? Not in your mindset, not in your emotions. Most people believe dopamine is the molecule of pleasure. They think it's released when we achieve something great, when we get recognition, when we finally arrive. But this is one of the greatest misunderstandings in neuroscience. Dopamine isn't about the moment you win, it's about the chase. It is the molecule that drives you forward, that gives you the energy to keep going when logic says stop, that fuels the fire to rise again when you've been knocked down. When you feel that surge of inner power, that unstoppable sense that you are called to something greater, that is dopamine moving through your system, not because you've reached the summit, because your brain believes the sum, it is possible. This molecule doesn't wait for success. It responds to effort, to movement, to the belief that progress is being made, no matter how small. It is the sacred spark that turns vision into action, and action into transformation. You are not lazy, you are not weak. Your system may simply be misfiring, trapped in loops of instant gratification and shallow reward. But when you realign dopamine with pursuit, when you anchor it not to the trophy, but to the training, not to applause, but to the process, you tap into a divine engine within your biology. The same circuitry that has driven warriors, prophets, and pioneers throughout history is embedded within you. It was never meant to lie dormant. The path to relentless motivation is not paved with hacks or hype, but with understanding the sacred design of your brain. Every time you resist the easy path, every time you lean into discomfort, every time you show up when no one is watching, dopamine begins to work in your favor. It begins to rise in anticipation of effort, not just results, and this changes everything. You stop needing the world to validate you. You stop waiting for conditions to be perfect. You begin to experience what the ancients called fire, what science now calls drive. It's not mystical, it's biological, but it feels spiritual because it connects you to your highest potential. When you learn how to harness dopamine correctly, you no longer need to be pushed. You are pulled by a force from within. You begin to move with clarity, with energy, with a sense of divine compulsion. You don't quit after the first failure. You don't fall apart when others doubt you. You don't need permission to act because now you're not chasing a feeling, you're embodying a calling. And every action you take becomes a form of worship, a declaration to the universe that you were born to pursue, to endure, to rise. Dopamine is not a reward for finishing. It is fuel for the faithful. The brain does not simply reward results, it rewards effort. This truth is etched into the very fabric of our nervous system. When you strive, when you sweat, when you give yourself to the process even without a guarantee of victory, something miraculous happens inside you. The brain begins to release chemicals that elevate your sense of purpose, sharpen your focus, and deepen your resilience. It doesn't wait for the finish line. It responds when you begin to move with conviction. In the unseen, in the grind, in the dark corners where no applause is given and no spotlight shines, this is where the brain wakes up. It recognizes the sacred in the struggle. It encodes the fight as worthy. You are being rewired not by success, but by the sacredness of your striving. There is a divine intelligence within the biology, a system designed not just to measure outcomes, but to honor obedience to the path. Every rep you push through, every moment you resist temptation, every time you show up without emotion but with intention, the brain takes note. It says, this is someone who is serious, someone who is shifting identity through action, and it begins to recalibrate your internal systems to support more of that behavior. Neurons fire not because you've won, but because you've walked forward in faith. The very structure of the brain, its synapses, its circuits, its networks begins to change as you lean into challenge. This is neuroplasticity at work, bending itself around your effort like clay around the hands of a sculptor. You are being reshaped into a vessel of strength, clarity, and pursuit. But it only happens when you choose the path of effort over ease, process over praise. The world may measure you by what you achieve, but your brain measures you by what you attempt. The inner reward system was designed to keep you moving towards something meaningful, to reinforce persistence, to honor the process. It recognizes when you push through resistance, and it offers internal fire, not the fire of arrival, but the fire of becoming. You weren't built to coast, you were built to rise, and the code is written into your biology. The more you move in alignment with this truth, the more your system becomes a furnace of drive. The more you struggle forward with your eyes set not on the crowd, but on the calling, the more powerful your inner reward circuitry becomes. This is the architecture of the relentless, those who move without applause, those who endure with no guarantee of gain, those who find energy in obedience and satisfaction in sacrifice. Effort is not just noble, it is encoded with divine reward. When you focus only on the end goal, on the medal, the money, the recognition, you rob your brain of the very mechanism that sustains true motivation. The circuitry of relentless drive is not activated by the destination. It is activated by the process. When you visualize the steps, the struggle, the repetitions, the cold mornings and silent nights, the discipline repeated day after day, your brain responds with fire. It begins to prepare for action, not fantasy. It lays down neural pathways that do not just dream, but execute. It begins to release dopamine, not as a reward for imagining success, but as a response to your commitment to the path. This is the secret of the unstoppable. They don't obsess over outcomes, they rehearse obedience. They don't fantasize about victory, they train their minds to embrace the climb. When you see the process in your mind over and over, when you feel the burn, when you hear your own breath in the silence of mental rehearsal, you are not daydreaming. You are sculpting the brain. You are awakening the machinery of pursuit. Visualization is not about pretending. It is about preparing, and the brain treats powerful preparation as real. It begins to adapt. It sharpens focus. It reduces hesitation. It primes your body to act as if you've already begun. There is a sacred energy that is released when you honor the process with your imagination. You step into alignment with the way your biology was created to operate, not as a beggar for results, but as a builder of foundations. When you do this, your motivation no longer spikes and crashes based on circumstances. It becomes a steady current flowing from the rehearsal of the process, not the worship of the reward. The highest performers, the most resilient warriors, the most consistent disciples of progress, all carry this truth. They don't just see where they're going, they see every step of what it takes to get there. They see the grind, they see the failures, they see the tears, and they make peace with the price. In doing so, they trigger the ancient system in the brain that was made not to fantasize, but to fight. When you visualize the process, the brain builds strength for the journey. It begins to crave the struggle, not run from it. It begins to reinforce the belief that effort is noble, that repetition is sacred, that mastery is in motion. And so you begin to rise not on the wings of emotion, but on the wings of devotion, not driven by the fantasy of comfort, but by the vision of the path itself. This is how motivation becomes a lifestyle, not by dreaming of the crown, but by preparing to carry the cross. There is a sacred transformation that occurs when you voluntarily step into discomfort. Not chaos, not recklessness, but intentional stress harnessed through things like cold exposure, breath control, fasting, or intense exertion. These are not just tests of will, they are instruments that train the nervous system to become unshakable. When you subject your body and mind to deliberate adversity, you are not weakening. You are awakening. You are signaling to the brain that pain is not the enemy, that challenge is not a threat, and the brain listens. It begins to recalibrate. It starts to shift the way it processes fear, effort, and resistance. You start to feel a change, not just in your body, but in your being. The same system that once signaled retreat now becomes a weapon for forward motion. When you enter the cold, not just physically but spiritually, You confront the part of yourself that craves ease and you declare war on it. You begin to rewrite the meaning of stress. It becomes something you run toward, not from. It becomes the altar where weakness is sacrificed and strength is born. Your breath becomes your anchor, your stillness becomes your shield, and your endurance becomes your testimony. And every time you embrace discomfort by choice, you become harder to stop, because you've already walked through the fire before the world tried to burn you. You've already made friends with pain before adversity came knocking. The nervous system is plastic. It rewires itself based on experience, and nothing rewires it more powerfully than chosen suffering. Cold plunges that shock your system, long runs that break your legs, fasts that silence the hunger, these are not punishments. They are rituals, they are invitations to evolve. They teach the brain that the presence of difficulty does not mean danger, that the heat of challenge does not mean failure. You start to become spiritually grounded, neurologically upgraded. You no longer seek comfort, you seek conquest, over self, over fear, over the patterns that once kept you small. You begin to feel motivation not as a burst of energy, but as a rising flame that does not go out, even in the dark. Your body stops controlling your mind, and your mind becomes the general over your biology. You learn to take dominion over your chemistry, to rule your impulses, to master your emotional weather. This is not theory, this is design. You were created to grow stronger through stress, not to avoid it. You were built to endure, not escape, and when you lean into discomfort on purpose, the nervous system honors you. It expands your capacity, it fortifies your heart, it sanctifies your drive, and suddenly, what once seemed unbearable becomes familiar. What once overwhelmed now awakens, and what once required motivation now requires only conviction. The foundation of unshakable motivation is not found in hustle or hype, it's found in rhythm. In biology, in sacred routines that align your body with its divine operating system. Without deep sleep, without real light from the sun, without movement that challenges the body, your motivation will always be unstable, because the very chemicals that fuel your drive depend on these ancient anchors. Sleep is not rest, it is recalibration. During sleep, your brain rewires what you learn, resets your emotional state, replenishes dopamine, and repairs the circuits that allow you to pursue goals with fire and clarity. Deprive yourself of sleep, and it doesn't matter how strong your will is. Your system will falter, your impulses will rise, your vision will blur, and what once felt meaningful will begin to feel heavy. The darkness of night is not your enemy, it is your ally. It is in that darkness that your brain does its deepest healing work, and when you rise with the sun, you activate the second pillar, light. Morning sunlight hitting the eyes signals to your brain that the day has begun. It calibrates your internal clock, boosts cortisol in healthy levels, triggers alertness, and sets the rhythm for energy throughout the day. Miss this light, and your system drifts into confusion. Your sleep gets worse, your hormones destabilize, and your motivation begins to fade not because of laziness, but because the clock that governs your chemistry is broken. The light was always meant to be your compass. The third anchor is movement, not just for fitness, but for fuel. Every time you move your body with intensity, through resistance, through challenge, through deliberate physical stress, you release molecules that lift your mood, sharpen your thinking, and elevate your motivation. Movement is not optional. It is the language your body speaks when it wants to awaken the mind. It signals that you are alive, that you are ready, that you are moving forward in alignment with your design. These three pillars, sleep, sunlight, and movement, are the Trinity of motivation. Ignore them, and you'll always be fighting upstream. Honor them, and you'll unlock a current of energy that doesn't crash with caffeine or fizzle with fear. You will begin to feel connected to something ancient, something holy, something that pulses in the roots of your biology and calls you to rise, to act, to move. This isn't about self-care. This is about dominion over your time, your habits, your vessel. You were never meant to operate in chaos. You were created for order. The body is a temple, and its maintenance is worship. When you begin to treat sleep as sacred, light as nourishment, and movement as ritual, your brain responds with strength. It rewards you with fire. It aligns you with your purpose. It reminds you, through chemistry and conviction, that you are not here to drift. External rewards can push you, but they will never anchor you. The applause of the crowd, the praise of others, the numbers on a screen, they rise and fall like waves. And if your motivation is tied to them, you will rise and fall with them. But there is another kind of reward, a deeper kind, built into the design of your brain, the internal reward system. When you act in alignment with your purpose, when you show up because it's who you are, not for a pat on the back, you activate something holy within your neurochemistry. Dopamine begins to release not because someone is watching, but because you are walking in integrity. You are no longer chasing approval, you are feeding the fire of your own becoming. This internal system was never meant to be dependent on the world. It was meant to be lit by truth, by commitment, by process, and when it is properly activated, it becomes a generator of relentless energy. You begin to experience joy in the hard work, fulfillment in the small steps, identity in the discipline. The brain rewards this deeply. It begins to reinforce the behavior with feelings of satisfaction, with clarity, with strength. You're no longer living in reaction to the world. You are creating from within it. This is how warriors are built. This is how visionaries endure. This is how people become unstoppable, not through the hype of others, but through the holiness of consistency. And the beautiful paradox is this: when you no longer need recognition, you become worthy of it. When you stop depending on the outcome, you fall in love with the process. And when you build from the inside out, the storms on the outside lose their power. Your identity becomes rooted not in the fruit, but in the faithfulness. You begin to understand that every rep, every fast, every early morning and silent victory is a form of worship, not to your ego, but to the purpose etched into your very biology. And in that worship, the brain begins to rewire. Dopamine no longer becomes a fleeting spike, but a steady river. The ups and downs smooth out. The burnout fades. The craving for validation dissolves. You become your own source, your own standard, your own fuel. And from that place, pure, powerful, and unshakable, you begin to move in a way that doesn't need the world to respond. Because your reward is built in. Your system has been sanctified. Your motivation is no longer borrowed. It is born.